All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going on a bit of a code archaeology expedition, digging right into the change logs for the Woodbury project. And, what we're going to find is this really fascinating story about how software really evolves. It's not just about adding new stuff. It's about a fundamental shift in the philosophy of how things get built. Okay, let's get into it.
And that really brings us to the core question for today's explainer. What is the real difference between just piling on more and more features versus intentionally building a platform? The story of Woodbury, especially over the last month or so, is a perfect case study in this exact transition. It's all about moving from just doing more to doing things in a way that's structured, reliable, and actually built to last.
So the first big theme that just jumps right out of the logs is this deliberate pivot. It's a move away from what felt like a mad sprint to just add more functionality, and a turn towards a really focused effort on establishing solid, understandable rules for how the whole system talks to itself. They went from building features to defining contracts.
So what in the world is a software contract? Well, think of it like a legal agreement, but for your code. It's this explicit, written-down promise that says, hey, this part of the system will behave exactly this way and expects this very specific kind of input. The whole point is to just get rid of all the guesswork and ambiguity. And that becomes absolutely critical when you're building a complex system that, both people and AI agents have to work with without everything falling apart.
Now, this is where the story gets really interesting when you look at the timeline. See, on March 5th, they're making things more reliable. Then, bam, on the 7th, there's this massive flood of new features all at once. But look what happens right after that. On the 11th and 12th, you see the response to that explosion of complexity. A huge refactor, and then this deliberate, focused effort to lock it all down with proper documentation and contracts. They built it, and then they made it solid. Okay, so all of this new discipline, this idea of building with contracts, it had a very, very visible result, the evolution of the user dashboard. It went from being, just another part of the system to becoming the absolute center of the Woodbury universe.
And this comparison just lays it all out, right? The dashboard used to be just a place you'd go to kind of tweak some settings. Now, it's the command center. It's the operational control plane for the entire system. And this wasn't an accident. It was a very clear strategic decision to create one single unified hub for anyone operating the platform.
And when we say it became the hub, we really, really mean it. I mean, the sheer volume of new surfaces that got integrated directly into the dashboard in such a short time is just wild. We're talking agent control, asset management, storyboards, training workers. The scope just completely exploded. And just to put a hard number on that complexity, the backend that's now powering this new unified dashboard, it has over 155 distinct API routes. And each one of those is a specific, defined endpoint for managing a different part of the system. That's the technical backbone of this new control plane we're talking about.
So, we've seen the big picture change with the dashboard, but how does this new discipline actually apply at a more granular level? To see that, let's zoom in on one of Woodbury's core concepts, pipelines, because the change here is incredibly telling.
Instead of just generating a pipeline and calling it a day, the system now treats it like a rigorous 4-stage engineering process. First, it designs the plan. Then, it generates the artifact. But, and this is key, it's not done. It then has to validate that artifact for any errors, and finally, verify that the system can actually find it and run it. The crucial point here is that just spitting out some code is no longer good enough.
This quote, and this is pulled right from their own documentation, it just says everything. It's their new mantra. A pipeline isn't done just because an AI generated some JSON. Nope. It's only complete when it's been proven to be valid, discoverable, and usable. This right here is the very essence of that contract-driven philosophy in action.
And here's the payoff for all that hard internal discipline. See, when you have a stable, predictable core that's built on strong contracts, you can then confidently start expanding outwards, plugging into a whole wider ecosystem of tools and services. And the latest changelog from just March 17th proves it. We're seeing new, deep integrations like an ElevenLabs tool for text-to-speech, a centralized API key manager, even Git integration right in the pipeline view. These aren't just features that are tacked on. They are bridges to a larger world, and they're all built on that stable foundation they worked so hard to create. So let's pull all of this together. What does this new engineering discipline actually look like? What are the key principles that have guided this really rapid but still very structured transformation?
It really all boils down to these 5 strategic decisions. First, the dashboard is the product. Second, pipelines are engineered, they're not just wished into existence with a magic prompt. Third, making the system easy to use for the person running it is now a top priority. Fourth, documentation isn't a chore you do at the end. It's critical infrastructure. And finally, the big one, a deliberate move away from chaotic ad hoc automation to predictable contract-driven automation.
And that leaves us with one last thought to take away. Seeing Woodbury's journey from just adding features to really building on contracts, it's worth asking ourselves, what are the unwritten rules and implicit assumptions in our own projects? What's that one really important process that we rely on every single day that desperately needs a clear, explicit contract? It's definitely something to think about. I'm curious to see what you come up with. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.